much sights to show you.
Hey everybody, this is your host John Iceberg from Shudder to Think, indie horror and horror filmmaking podcast. I'm here today with special guest, cinematographer and film producer Rob Patrick Stern. So yeah, thanks again, Rob, for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This is amazing. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, so just for the audience out there, I work with Rob quite a few times on a bunch of feature films and horror films, and he's been amazing, just mentor to me and an incredible cinematographer, and he's doing some really cool stuff down here. We can get into like the sound stage too if you want to talk about that later. But yeah, just I guess the main question I have is like, how did you get into film? Like, what was your path into film?
Oh my. How far back do you want to go? Do you want to go back to like the early like scratching and painting on the wall, like Marquis de Sade? Like I'm just like scratching things into my parents' bedroom wall and looking at shadows and light.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the origins of it, like if you let me drift back a little bit, people do ask me this question. They're like, it's more like, how the hell did you get here type of thing. And for me, it's like, yeah, that's a really great question. And I've had to piece it together over the last couple of years so that I had like a real story. Because at first I was like, man, I don't really know how I got here. I do, but not in full. And really what kind of spurned me putting the puzzle pieces together was 2020. When we all had that brief vacation to kind of think about what we were doing with ourselves. I was able
a brief vacation.
Yeah, exactly. Just a brief little vacation.
Yeah,
okay, we'll go with it. You could kind of piece together where you came from a little bit further when you actually could sit for more than 10 minutes and actually think on things. And yeah, I was super fortunate that I had some other people kind of reflect with me, like where this did come from, family and friends. And I turned 40 right in 2021, and like people were actually on my 40th birthday, kind of not just reaching out to say happy birthday, but they were kind of telling me like, oh wow, I remember back in the day when you were doing this and you're doing that. That's so cool. And I'm like, oh dang, I forgot about that. Like, so during this period of time, I was able to piece it together. Like, where did this really stem from?
Yeah.
I told you this was going to be the long version. So
that's okay.
I think some of it comes from like as a kid, I was like super into dioramas, like shoebox dioramas, like, and I kept thinking like during the pandemic, because this is that that vacation. I'll just keep calling it that for right now. There's nothing vacation like about it, but it was like thinking about even just the ratio of a shoebox on its side. I started to think like, am I losing it? Like I'm thinking about like, is a shoebox like a kid's shoebox, like back in the day when I was actually making dioramas, that's your like establishing or your mega wide shot. Is it like 239?
Yeah, probably.
Is it
235?
Yeah. Am I looking at my shoebox mentally and going, what ratio is this shoebox? So because I kept
like
thinking like, yeah, right. So like you're like a little kid and you're like, okay, as an adult, I'm buying like maybe some basketball shoes, and that thing is definitely large format. Right. But if I'm thinking about my kid's shoebox, that thing's probably like 235, 239. And here I am, wondering how I got to this point. And I remember my first love of dioramas, just like putting the dinosaurs in it, painting the background by hand, putting the sand down and collecting rocks from my yard and kind of building out a wide shot. And kind of like, wow, dang, does it really go that far back? And I realized I did love dioramas so much that like I started building a shelf of them. So I had a bookshelf and probably ditched all the books because that's what filmmaking. Now I'm kidding. Filmmakers don't ditch books; they need books. But like I started making each shelf a different diorama. Like it was almost like all of a sudden one diorama was setting a scene, and then the next diorama it's just like a collection of dioramas that almost looked like a storyboard. Yeah. And here I am thinking this. I'm like 4 decades later, like, is that what I was doing? Like, it was just naturally happening. I really had an interest in it. And then someone recognized in me that I, was a baseball card collector. So I realized, oh, my photography background is not like, I'm not thick in photography. Like I don't like I still have a lot to learn in it, but I do understand what a healthy medium looks like. A healthy medium close up looks like. Here's my dogs ruining the
Oh yeah.
audio. Uh, oh, might have to pause real quick.
Oh yeah, that's fine. You know, the interesting thing was you were talking about the dioramas, and I just remember reading or listening to a podcast with like Jeremy Saunier, who
Mm,
he talked about like doing a lot of dioramas too. And then I would play like with GI Joes and make these big
yeah.
like things in the backyard when my dad would get mad because I let the grass grow like insanely tall, but then I'd have these like great like
Yes.
Vietnam era like, you know.
Yes.
So there's some
Exactly.
just very interesting to think about, you know. But yeah, to go back to you know, like so getting into so kind of from that early formative era of like
Hmm.
starting to understand like the visual sense of it all, you know, like I don't know, like how did you kind of get into becoming a cinematographer? Or getting into film? We can kind of leapfrog back into getting into film and then going into the DP world.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, if I were to put a cap on where this all came from via the dioramas, the baseball cards, which taught me, framing and sizing of medium shots and close ups. I then started just to piece together this whole storyline for myself. I was
Mm,
like, this has always been present, in my life. And, I think naturally, for me, I always wanted to make art. My mom put me in every art class she could, and she
mm.
put me in every sport she could just to wear me out. And obviously, I think that's maybe a sign of a filmmaker is that like, you have such energy and such thought that you
Mm,
want to apply to things.
yeah.
And I think I recognized that in what my parents did, which was like, if it's an art available class or program or sport, let's put Rob and his brother in it. And so from that, I think naturally the combination of art early on, sports art early on, collecting and understanding, just photography from sports and
Mm,
sporting events, and then yeah, of course I had a background. My father loves movies. It's hard to ignore when a
yeah.
parent or both parents love movies. Usually, I always feel like when people tell this story, there's always one of the two parents that love movies, and the other one's just kind of like, ugh, it's like a dirty habit or something.
Right.
Or you have like a grandparent that will let you watch anything. So my father was really into like action movies,
Mhm.
and it would always be like 3 frames too late when he would tell me to cover my eyes. So
Oh
I'd
yeah.
already seen whatever it was. So oh, you shouldn't be watching this
Hey.
right now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a boob.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's not, because he was so into it. He was
Yeah.
so interested in it. And then, when I would, would go over to my grandmother's house, she was just kind of like totally, totally up for things. She
Mm,
was an amazing grandmother, but she also just was like, hey, this is your time. Like, you get to hang out here maybe a handful of times a year. Let's go rent something. And I would
yeah.
end up renting, the strangest stuff. I don't even know if you can find these things, but we rented like the Fat Boys collection.
Oh
Like, I don't
yeah.
know if
Yeah.
anybody remembers the Fat Boys.
I remember the Fat
Uh,
Boys, yeah. What
yeah,
was
and like, why was I watching that?
It was like probably like 86 or 87, I think that there was like that movie with the Fat Boys where they were like the ambulance guys or something like that. And I think they even teamed up with like the Beach Boys or they did a cover of the Beach Boys at some point. I don't know. It's
Yeah. Oh,
strange. The Fat Boys.
between the Fat Boys and maybe their key art or their cover art, their
Yeah.
poster art. I'll never forget. I just feel like it's all been like if I were to like set this up as a DP could, like I almost see like a visual funnel that got me here,
Mm,
like from the art, the sports, the selection of like the end of your grocery store used to have this kiosk
mm,
that had like video options.
yeah.
Like if you were in the west suburbs, you probably had some of those like you go to your grocery store, and at the end of one of the kiosks, right next to where you were checking out, there would be like a 6.5 foot tall, maybe taller. I don't know. I was a kid, so maybe it was only 4 foot tall for all I
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
it would be like head to toe, VHS that you could like you could look at the key art
Mhm.
and rent at the grocery store, which was
Yeah.
kind of a weird thing now
Huh.
that I think about it. Do you recall any of that?
I remember like kind of like a $5 bin kind of VHS tapes and stuff there, or it'd be like Jeff Speakman or something like these kind of direct to video but direct to the grocery
Oh,
store video kind of
yeah.
like I don't know, those kind of like American Ninja 5 or Magnum 4,
Yeah.
all those kinds of films or whatever. But
Well, I remember seeing like an actual copy of like Hellraiser there, and
yeah,
it was kind of like, when this is the '80s, and I'm probably sub 10 years old, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, look at this poster,
right, yeah,
and that's a little foreshadowing for your other questions coming up later.
right,
But basically, I found myself drawn to video stores as I got a little bit older. I could I could bike somewhere, get a Slurpee or a slushie or whatever, and go to the video store and maybe not even rent half the stuff, but I would sit in there just like looking at the key art on
yeah,
these VHS or even DVD as I got a little bit further into my teens.
hmm
Just kind of studying key art physically.
yeah,
All of a sudden you start to realize the path to this, and then this kind of like amazing thing that happens where one day you're like, oh, I'm 15. Oh, wait a minute. My parents have a high eight camera. Oh, and my other buddy, his parents have a high eight camera.
yeah,
And like, should we just be making our own movies? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, one of my friends has got a driving permit. Let's shoot. Like, it's just like all of a sudden, like no holds bar. You're
right,
shooting. We started off with a zombie movie. We started making wrestling movies, like wrestling features, really embarrassing stuff. But at the time, it was like I started to get less and less intrigued with being on camera. I actually didn't find it that comfortable at all.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
found myself really like more interested in being behind camera. And, I'm very fortunate, but my friends recognized it. And they were pretty much like, hey, Rob, why don't you just keep shooting these? We'll be the ones in front of camera. I'm like, yeah, totally cool. I
yeah,
don't want to do this
huh,
junk. And
yeah,
then slowly it started to happen. And then through college, I took this weird journey of like meeting another great friend that was like, hey, there's more out there in the world than Michael Bay movies, right, Rob? And I'm like, there is? What are you
base
talking about?
explosions, yeah,
Yeah, wait, what? And then all of a sudden, when I started watching, strange copies of foreign films at
Mm,
the local DeKalb, like 5 for $5 video mart, it was
yeah,
like $5 for 5 VHS for 5 days. And I
wow,
went ham. I probably
yeah,
blew hundreds of dollars just walking, a mile back and forth with a, grocery bag full of VHS, and just hammering out
yeah,
viewings.
wow,
It's
and
super fun.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome,
that's kind of the start, right?
yeah,
Kind of laying the groundwork of cinema history, and then I'm just very fortunate that like I just found the digital SLR wave hitting.
yeah,
Like there's parts of me that really I think and I ponder like what happens if this would have happened to me in like 1992
hmm
and not 2007 when the digital revolution happened.
right,
What would have happened? Like I would have spent 15 years, you know, um, maybe in another job, another position, but there just wasn't any access to these things.
right,
2007 happened, and it was like very early on, and yeah, I was shooting with some different Canon and Panasonic
mm,
cameras, which were great,
yeah,
but I was also trying to falsify 24p because the 24p back then was kind of garbage,
right,
wasn't even real. It looked like buns. You had to
yeah,
like break it. Like I would film it through other TVs just to like get an edge, like that
yeah,
digital edge off of it. And so I was already kind of doing that. It's kind of
mm,
already problem solving by shooting with HVXs and
mm,
different Canons. Like the GL1 was my sweetheart.
yeah,
I know a lot of people had the XL1, but the GL1 was my sweetheart.
nice,
Um, you know, so yeah, I just kind of found my way through that era of kind of just like, breaking the rust off. Like
hmm
you got to kind of have this world of like exploring who you are as a filmmaker and shooting garbage and making garbage, and
yeah,
that's just a part of the process. Like you
oh yeah,
can't you don't just like open the box up, break the seal off, and you're like you're shooting, Roger Deakins style stuff. Not, you know,
No.
you really got to shoot some garbage.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's great because I think like one thing we talk about a lot is like the lessons that you learn from every single project and how you can take those to your next ones. And even early on, I think it's like, yeah, it's fun. I never was interested in learning the manual on anything at all. So I would just take something and
Yeah.
just figure it out, or try to get something cool out of it,
Oh,
because
100%.
and so
I
so yeah.
still do that, man. I don't want
Yeah.
some tech nerd telling me how to shoot this thing. They're
Well, is
not in
it?
the trenches.
Right, yeah. Well, it's interesting because you brought up a good point, which was the DSLR revolution. I think is really
Hmm.
fascinating, and even to
Yeah.
go into like how many horror films are out there now or whatever, and it really is a matter of like I feel like that the democratization or whatever of filmmaking. Because I remember even going to SIU, it's like you had a lot of friends would like
Mhm.
drop out a semester just to save money to pay for film stock or something,
Yeah.
and so it
Oh
was kind
yeah.
of, so I feel like, yeah, it is an interesting thought because it's like, yeah, like the fact that you kind of came up at that time, it's like they kind of opened. I mean, I still remember getting like a T3i and getting that magic lantern hack on it,
Yep. Oh yeah.
and
A
all of a sudden
hundred
it's like
percent.
you're like, oh man, the whole world has opened up in a way, and so I don't know.
And then I got a little bit of money. I got a little cheddar off a job, and I bought the 6D, and that opened my
Oh
world up
yeah,
to full frame. And like all of a sudden, you just kind of make a bunch of awesome like micro moves, which were major moves back then.
yeah, yeah,
But really surrounded by some friends that wanted to pursue it.
yeah,
I wasn't the jock that went and like hit up the kegger next door. I was actually the dude that like we played the game, and then I went out with my good friends and we'd make things, make
yeah,
skits, and then since we had two, high eight cameras each,
mm,
we'd break out into teams of two or three or four each, and each take a camera and come back and like see who had the best skit that night on a Friday or Saturday.
yeah,
Um,
nice,
really strange, self-entertaining group as I think back on it, but very fortunate though,
yeah.
super fortunate.
I think it's kind of cool because I still remember even going to like in St. Charles, which is a suburb of Chicago. They had like this Coffee House Gaberte or whatever, and they had a guy there who used to like shoot movies, kind of like just like super low budget, no budget indie films, and it was kind of like before this was like probably like 95, 96 or something, but it was just so fascinating. I think at the time it's like you kind of knew about a guy who knew about a guy who had a camera or something. And so it's just kind of, I feel like the DSLR revolution was so interesting and just great to be able to actually finally access it, to put a 50 millimeter lens on a camera and get something like,
Yeah.
whatever,
Oh
so,
yeah.
so I
I
don't
mean,
know.
just having the option of different lensing, that changed everything.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, you could go crazy and like, the GL1, you could zoom in on something and get the equivalent of maybe a 50, but
Right.
it's still not the same as like being able to change out a lens or
Right.
adapt a lens, or
Yeah.
that was like a game changer
Yeah.
for
So
me, especially.
So if we switch gears for a second and we'll talk a little bit about kind of going into horror movies and lighting because you've shot several. I worked on uh, Revealer, that was like a Shudder original, along with Brooklyn 45, another Shudder original, and then Black Mold, which was like a Tubi original. And I think there's a couple other horror films that you worked on as well. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about, maybe we could just go to like what your favorite horror movies are or the horror movies that influence you.
Oh man, I mean, the horror movies that I love are the ones that just still scare me to today. Like, and some of them are recent. Like, I'd say as a kid, Hellraiser's like the first one, especially. Like, always, it kind of still takes the cake for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really, get scared by many of the other franchises or big series stuff. But man, that first Hellraiser, holy
Mm.
moly! I still can't really watch it that well. Like, I
Yeah.
still get the creeps from it. It's
Yeah.
weird. But then more recently, I think, as a filmmaker or just film lover, you kind of go through different eras. So
Yeah.
in my recent era, I don't find myself super scared by anything, but one film in particular scared me. It's called The Snowtown Murders.
Mm.
It's out of I believe it's out of Australia or New
Australia, yeah,
Zealand.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's a daytime movie. So I feel like one of my biggest things that I tell other filmmakers or directors that I work with is like, if you can scare somebody in the daytime,
mm,
man, you're doing real things. Like
right,
you're making real moves because when you're shaping light and in a dark room, you can always find a good pocket of shadow to scare somebody. Man, if you scare them in the daytime,
right,
man, these people won't be able to. Not only will they not be able to sleep, they won't be able to be awake either.
right.
Like, that. So
Yeah.
when I saw Snowtown Murders, I was like, all right, now we're really playing with gas. Like
Yeah.
this is, to me, that's probably one of my more recent ones where I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a thing.
That's an
Have
interest.
you seen the movie?
Yeah, it's been a while, but that's an interesting one because it's so brutal, and then it is kind of based on like a true crime thing as well, and so I don't know, I
Yeah,
always find that much more disturbing in a way,
yeah,
like real life horror films or films that are based on real life incidents, because yeah, there's just
right.
it's one thing I think to kind of like a lot of slasher fans are always about like like they Jason and Freddy and stuff like that, but it's like this it's so corny in a way, and
Yeah,
I
it's like
mean.
a cereal box, like Captain Crunch is gonna
Right, yeah,
kill you
yeah,
or something.
yeah.
It's like, nah, dude, I ain't scared of Captain Crunch. I'll just punch
Right.
that thing.
But I
But if
think
you tell me like there's like a legit documentary, like if you're looking for a doc that scares
right.
me,
Yeah.
there's one called I believe it is made by Michael Broomfield,
Mm.
called oh my gosh, it's out of LA. It's called The Light Sleeper, not The Light Sleeper. Oh my gosh, it'll pop back in my head.
Yeah.
But there's an
Yeah.
amazing doc that's scary as well. And
Yeah.
like you're hitting on it, it's like whatever's real life,
Yeah.
between that doc or Snowtown Murders,
Oh
like
yeah.
those are things that are legit
Yeah.
scary to me now.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's interesting as a filmmaker. I think you have to kind of go into like if you want to make a scary film, I think you have to tap into what you're talking about is like the deep emotions that we feel, and it's like always like okay, being alone. And then I think during the day, yeah, being alone in the countryside, like I always joke with my, like I'm much more afraid of being alone in the middle of nowhere in a cornfield, or like in a small town area or like a rural area than being in like the big city or something alone. Like I'll take being in the city anytime, any night or time of night versus like being, you know, it's like you just go back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre or just any of
yeah,
those like, I don't know, anytime a big, nasty, dirty old truck drives by me, like if I'm biking on the road, it's like,
yeah,
yeah, let's just hope that guy
yeah.
doesn't stop.
Yeah, at least don't stop. Or, oftentimes as an adult, I start to think of like how crazy Duel is.
Duel,
Like
yeah,
as
yeah,
as a teenager, I was like, oh man, who cares about Duel, man? It's Steven Spielberg, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, man, Duel is legit. Now I'm
yeah,
like
yeah.
looking at my rear view every other minute. I'm like, is this guy followed me from the last rest stop?
Right, yeah, yeah.
Or is
We
this
went
in my mind?
right. Well, I took my kids out to like see the what the Northern Lights or whatever. We were out in the countryside at night, and we were out in the
The
middle of
perfect
no.
setting
Oh,
right there.
totally,
Here you
yeah.
go.
We were out in
Perfect
the
setting.
we were out in the middle of nowhere, and then this truck like just bombs down the road, and we're like alone, and it's kind of dark, and I hear like this like like the big rig kind of like pickup truck where they like souped it up, and it comes
Yeah.
flying by us, but it kind of slows down and looks at us, and then it goes away, and I'm just kind of like, all right, I've seen a lot of horror films. If he comes back. And sure enough, this guy like kind of goes down about a half mile, and then he turns around. He's coming back. I'm like, get in the car, kids! Like we're out of
Yeah.
here because like I'm like I'm gonna live. I'm not gonna
Oh,
die
for sure.
through it.
So,
So
so movies like play differently depending on what era you're in, what age you're
yeah.
in. Like
Oh yeah.
I didn't give a crap about Duel, but like now I can't stop thinking about Duel
Right.
all the
Yeah.
time. And it's like not even that crazy of a movie, but the
Yeah.
idea of it is way more haunting to me currently
Oh
in,
yeah.
in my age. But
What's interesting?
yeah, just kind of the love of those movies I think is pretty
Oh
cool.
yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing that you bring up, and this is something that we talked about last time we were hanging out, was like Spielberg and his sense of blocking and pacing and his kind
Yeah.
of moving masters. And I think for horror, it's such an important thing to kind of create that tension. And Duel's an amazing example of that with
Hmm.
like the building. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about as a cinematographer, working with the director on moving the camera because I learned a lot from you about like slowing it down, like letting it just, if it's a wide or a medium, even like lock it down unless. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about the
Yeah, sure.
intentionality of movement with camera and specific to horror. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great prompt because you brought me to something that I always talk about in general in filmmaking, but horror is kind of like the genre, and I like to refer to it as genre that like explores all aspects of filmmaking. You're hitting on huge detailed sound, huge in detail art department, in detail editing, in detail of every department. I love that. That's one of the my favorite things about genre and one of my favorite things about horror in general. But within that, because there is all these different things in play, the thing I always think about via cinematography is like, how do we not cut?
mm,
How can we hold in this moment and not cut? Because like so many like throwback films, and people love that. It's
yeah.
cool. And I'm about to say something that people will probably shriek. But like when you cut to an insert of like something so tight, you're like, oh, I think that's a knife going into a chest.
Right.
Yeah, you know what? That's a knife going into a chest.
Yeah.
But like like I would rather hold as long as I could. And maybe if the knife in the chest per se, I don't know why I'm picking on this.
Yeah.
Probably, watching I don't know, Inferno lately or something.
Yeah.
And like knowing that like yes, they did a great job with that special effect, but if I know that's where we're going to end, I would build it backwards. I would
Mm,
go, okay, this is what they want. This is great. Now, with enough time and enough pre-production,
mm,
I know that's the end goal. Now I'm going to build us backwards and prep us backwards so that like if this is a swinging shot into a fake chest or however in the scene, I'm going to do my best if I can to get away from an insert and to get away from an edit or a cut.
mm.
So to me, it's like building the movie as seamless as possible. And within that idea means like the least amount of cuts as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Spielberg does best.
Yeah.
Not that this is the Steven Spielberg podcast, but that'd
Right.
be cool.
Yeah.
Hashtag Steven Spielberg podcast. It would, like, you find a way if you can, to me, like a story really holds up well if you don't have to cut away from something.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And he was kind of the master of that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he really was just like, hey, I'm going to show you something, but you don't really know that like this two shot actually is going to be a walk and talk as this one person walks away, and then it's going to be the end cap to this other scene
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
is the scene where this guy leads us to this other, like Jaws does it perfectly.
Mm,
If anybody, especially on this podcast, remembers Jaws, and where they have that shark hanging upside down, you're like on a two
mm,
shot where the shark's between the two men, and you're
yeah.
like, oh, this is some medium wide shot,
Mm,
and MWS that's just going to be boring as f. Who cares? But
yeah.
then you realize like it's a oneer, and now we're playing with fire. Now we're playing with risk, and that's what I love is that we're hanging on performance for about 2 minutes maybe, and they're talking with this two shot, and then the guy on the right side of the frame all of a sudden he's like, yeah, cool, wraps up, and we anchor onto him, and
Yeah.
the camera is moving slash following him, and he's now in a walk and talk with somebody he picked up along the way from that news
Right.
conference.
Yeah.
And then it gets to a third segment where now he gets stopped by another person that kind of, I forget, I think it's the one,
I
maybe
think
the
the
mother
mother
in
of
town.
Alex Kittner's
She's like
mom.
pissed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She
All of a sudden,
smacks
so
him.
you have a 3-act structure in
Yeah.
one shot.
Yeah. It's
Head
incredible.
explosion. Head explosion.
It's
You know
incredible.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you never notice it too, and it's so fascinating. And that's
Seamless.
yeah,
Beautiful stuff.
and that was like when I went to NAB. I was telling you when Dean Cundy was talking about that too, where he would talk about like you have to kind of you try to build your scene within that shot and the least amount of
Yep.
cuts you can do, which is awesome.
Yep.
And I think with horror it's so great too because it's like you can sustain tension. Like I was even like when I was like starting to write music, it's like I realized like just a hanging note with like sustain, literally called
Sustain. Yeah.
sustaining note, but
Literally called sustain.
it sustains that tension, and so you don't feel any kind of rest ever. And I noticed like even with editing, it's like you can never let a scene kind of come to a completion. It always has to like hang over
Yep.
the next scene or whatever. And so
Exactly.
or
J hooking the audio, you know,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
even I don't know if viewers know that, but they're J hooking the audio. When you look at a timeline, you know, if we're talking about a physical timeline, you know, if anybody can relate to this, that's not a direct filmmaker.
Yeah.
You have an audio file and a video file, and when you end up cutting it from scene to scene, you kind of let the next scene overflow into the other, you know, the or the previous, vice versa, and we call it J hooking.
Mm.
And the audio itself just subconsciously travels you
Yeah.
past that scene. You know,
Yeah.
it's pretty special. It can be
It's
very special.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And then to yeah, it's just fascinating. I feel like I learned so much from horror, and I realized kind of going into it,
Yes,
like, wow, this is far more challenging than I thought because of everything. It has to have so much intention to it.
100%.
Like
Yeah,
the inserts, the cutaways, the reaction shots, like and I have ADD, so I get kind of bored sometimes. But it's like I realize in the edit, it's like you want to have that slow push and go longer than you think.
you just always go a little bit longer than you think, and
Yeah.
when you're about to end a scene, end a little shorter, and then all of a sudden, you know, if those two ideas actually make sense to somebody that we're talking to right now, you know, I could explain it better in person, but or
Yeah,
on a timeline.
yeah,
But like hold as long as you can and just hold a little bit longer. And before you end that scene, just end like 3 to 4 seconds. I shouldn't say seconds, 3 to 4 frames short.
yeah,
And that always seems to like get you in a really good place in an edit.
yeah,
Not saying that's going to be your lock, but man, it'll get you close, you
yeah.
know?
So what do you think? So going over like some of the films that you've made, what
Hmm.
like and working with the director. I don't know if you could talk a bit, how much of a discussion over like these kind of elements or these horror elements or you know was there, and then maybe from there we could talk a little bit about like kind of what you plan for when you're shooting those big shots versus like the inserts, all those kinds of like the gags and all that kind of thing, like the considerations there. So I don't know if you maybe just talk first about like the director DP relationship in crafting a horror movie, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to how you would do non-genre movies as well. You're really kind of going through a script, and I have my own process, you know, now that I do this. I've been doing it full time 15 years, which is wackadoo. But like you know, I have a process of like reading things backwards. I work everything backwards. So I'll read a script for pleasure just to see if I'm interested in it, obviously. Everyone should do that. Just try to read it for pleasure.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I do is I actually start with the end scene and I start reading scene by scene
Hmm.
backwards. I don't actually like literally read it backwards. That makes no sense. But I physically read scene by scene backwards so that I can know where we're coming from.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like how you build backwards in your design work.
Hmm.
Not just in your camera work, but your lighting, and then also how something is to be revealed. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all still kind of like taking the same page out of Hitchcock's book, which is
Yeah.
like, don't show the wide shot. Wait until you need to show the wide shot.
Hmm.
Don't show the insert. Wait until you need to actually have an insert. Question mark, do you need an insert?
Right.
Just try to hold as long as you can because, like, the reveal is why the butts are in the seats. The jump scare is the reveal. The car crash is the reveal. The kiss is the reveal.
Hmm.
Hold out as long as you can. You ever watch a movie and you're like, they haven't kissed yet, and we've been looking at two faces coming together for the last 3 minutes.
Right.
They haven't kissed yet. It's because that's the reveal, right? So like it's just kind of like always holding as long
Yeah.
as you can. Just like let the heartbeats, let the blood flow, like let all these things happen as long as you can. And that takes a special filmmaker to understand these things. And I consider myself just an extension of the filmmaker. I'm a translator. I'm very fortunate that I have found these gifts, like I said, through friends and family that believed in me. I could probably get misty eyed about it, but like I'm very fortunate to have, you know, gotten to this point where like people have recognized it in me and kept pushing me to do it because there's been
Yeah.
a lot of ups and downs. But not to go down that road. I'll go down a road of like of understanding, you know, the director DP relationship, which is, you know, you if the director, there's two different avenues which I won't fully get into unless you really wanted to, which is like the DP who's directing their own script, or the DP, I'm sorry, the director who's directing their own script, or the director who's directing someone else's script.
Right.
But in the meantime, we can chat about the idea that you're working with them to like translate this idea the best you can within the parameters you have.
Yeah.
And you know, the parameters are always is similar, you know, very much you know, the triangle that we all talk about, whether you're union, non-union, freelance, um, corporate, commercial, photographer, yada yada yada. That same triangle. So within that triangle, we call it, you know, good, fast, and cheap.
Yeah.
You can only have two, right? You can only have
Yeah.
two. Pick two. And then within that, you then, you know, work within what you've been given and do your best to translate, like spend a lot of time with the script, break it down with the director, and find out. To me, the first thing I do, and I'll try to speed this up for you a
That's
little
good.
bit. But the first thing I do is I actually walk through other shots, like through what I used to do is like just pull stills from movies. Now we have this amazing subscription based. Should I get paid for this?
Shot deck.
Okay. Hey, Shot Deck, if you're hearing me right now, you're on John Eisberg's new podcast. You should probably put in on this because it's going to do some good things.
What's up?
Love and Shot Deck.
I have a subscription too. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I just paid it actually last week. I think. Every filmmaker should.
Yeah.
And Shot Deck, you know, now allows me to more efficiently do this, where I just kind of like, you know, type ideas, colors, yada yada, into a computer, and it spits back frames from other movies. So within this process, I start talking to a director about not just the stills that I think could fit the movie, but I really need to know what they don't like.
Right.
We already know what we like, right? We all like there's a reason why I'm on this movie. Why I've been hired for it. I know the director's other films. I've gotten used to like having these conversations, but what I really need to get down to brass tacks is what they don't like. Some people will tell you like, I don't like camera below the nose. I don't want a backlight or a hair light on them. Everybody's got their things. You just got to get to that information to me as soon as possible, and then really just start working the design elements. Like let the movie take the wheel.
Yeah.
And you start to just touch on every department. Like not only am I working with the director for probably the first 2.5 weeks, but then after that, I really need to start having conversations with every single department. Not just effects. Effects is a big one, especially in horror.
Yeah.
But maybe even the hair person, because that plays a huge role in horror. Because like, where do we hide the tube at the blood tubing? So if we're going to hide blood tubing, is this on a male or female? Like, is it in a costume? Is it is it an actual you know, like something they've made on the side that's made for an insert? Is it, you know, there's so many things in the effects world, but then you have to work with wardrobe now. I need to work with wardrobe. We're going to hide this blood tubing in this, you know, part of a necklace, maybe some other short, like all of a sudden, okay, we got to hide a blood tube with the spaghetti top or some crazy thing. Like these are the things we need to know about, because like, if it is that way, now I need to change my lighting per se, because maybe I need more shadow on the shoulders so that, like if this chick's wearing a spaghetti strap thing or a pair of suspenders, or, you know, who the heck knows, but now, like the story is taking the wheel is what I'm getting at. So the story's taking the wheel. It's telling you where to have these conversations with what department: hair, makeup, wardrobe. Now you're working with your lighting department to go, okay, hey, listen, I know y'all just were hired last week, but guess what? I need shadow to be on these shoulders because we can't see this blood rig right here. So like, this is what I'm thinking. We naturally know the actor via the director is going to land in this corner. She's going to get her head popped or blown off or whatever. And we now have to work our way backwards from that. So that means this corner for the rest of this scene or the rest of this film has to be either a dark corner, or the character turns off a light in scene 50. And that's what leads to that dark corner. But we still have to work our way backwards. And for us to know that she's going to get popped right here in this specific wardrobe, we need to know that we have enough shadow versus highlight and whatever ratio we want to fit the rest of the film. So you're really touching on all these departments. This is super long-winded. I've had one IPA, and maybe it was too strong.
It's okay. No, it's good. Well, I just think it's interesting because there are like so many considerations you have to think about, and even like I think I was telling you about that film I was on in Kentucky, where I got to work for kind of like my first time with a, you know, like a special effects, like practical effects, blood.
Yeah, nice.
And it was amazing. and it was great to see just the amount of artistry and the intention and the attention to detail that went into it. And so you kind of want to go, oh yeah, I want to make sure that I'm getting what you're doing well, that like document it well with and hiding all of the cheats or whatever. So I think we would
Yep,
even have
exactly.
discussions of how do you want to cheat this? Is there something? So I would let him kind of tell me sometimes, like, what do you think is the best way to kind of go about showing this, hiding that
Yeah,
gag, keeping your guy out of the shot. And then, it's really fascinating just to think about just all of the different, just that whole
the
network, I guess.
exchanges.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
exchanges, because like for a movie to be seamless via picture and edit and sound, effects also, like, like, is a huge part of this. Like, you have to hide the effects seams. I have to
Mm,
hide the tubing. I have to hide the literal seam in the neck appliance.
yeah.
You might have a large chest appliance piece that goes all the way up under the neck, and I know this is going to be audio based, but if I could show via video, like, if the appliance applies all the way underneath the neckline, I
Yeah.
know that this has got to be a light from directly above, and the shadow is hiding that seam.
Right.
I'm just trying to do my people right. They're working their butts off to get
Oh yeah.
this going, and the
Yeah.
last thing I want to do is disrespect the work they've been doing for
Right.
weeks, and the testing we've done,
Yeah.
and the actor who sat in the makeup chair for 6 hours
Oh my
before
God.
call.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I put light on the seam, and they're like, "What are we doing here right now?"
Right.
I'm like, "It's because, like, I do my homework. I want to make sure that it's
Yeah.
tested. I want to make sure I work backwards. I get all the answers where they need to be,
Oh yeah.
and then I work with my teams to make sure it lines up the right way, hopefully on time and on
Yeah.
budget. And
I wouldn't mind talking
yeah,
about.
that's kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about stunts in a second, but yeah, it's an interesting thing because I remember, yeah, the film I was on, the guy was like in makeup for a long time, a lot of prosthetics. He was, I always tried to make sure that we were quick because I could tell he was just sweating under that suit, and then
Melting
you
away
throw,
in
oh
there,
yeah,
yeah,
and so I'm like, I want to make sure he doesn't fall out, from this. So we,
or pass out, or
yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. Fall out, pass out. You got it.
and he had like these big boots on too, like these kind of like these platform shoes to give him more height too. So it was just like,
Yeah,
yeah, so it's interesting considerations. And then to go to the other thing now, it's like I feel like another big part of a horror movie beyond the practical effects is stunts, And so I don't know if you want to
yeah.
talk a little bit about working with stunt coordinators as a DP, and I know I feel like it definitely the pace slows down for safety for sure. So I don't know if you could just talk about some of that stuff.
Right, right. I mean, depending on the stunt work, I mean, if you're talking about fight scenes, you're talking about working with a coordinator, right? Because you don't really want anybody to get hurt. That's like the worst thing in the world. Like, and thankfully, I've never really been a part of anything where people have gotten hurt. I'm very grateful for that. But like, you work with somebody who works on this daily, whether that's your effects person or your stunt choreographer, they're working on this stuff daily, just
Yeah.
like I'm working on lighting plans and lighting designs, camera work, compositions, all these other nonsense. They're working on this actual stunt choreography every single day. They're very versed in it. They're exercising it, and you really have to get to these sequences early. And I shoot as much as I can with an iPhone. Like, just grab your phone, the
Mm.
nearest camera, whatever that is, and just start really walking through a slow rehearsal without the phone. Follow their lead. They're going to tell you the advantages, just like the effects person is going to show you the advantages of whatever angle that they want you to land this climax of the movie at, whether that's a knife to the chest, like I keep making fun of, or a punch, like via a choreographer who's going to say, "Hey, this is where this person takes that final punch right
Mm.
here." Let them have the floor. Let them take the wheel for a second. You are a designer in this. You might be a part of the holy trinity of design, but let them take the wheel. They're the specialists. They're going to say, "Hey, you know what? Be on a longer lens right here. This dude's going to give an uppercut. It's
Mm.
going to send a shockwave into this storyline." And I'll be like, "Dope. I'm going to hit this from a little further back on an 85. But
Mm.
how about we do this in slow mo? Cool. I agree. Let's do it. Blah blah blah." And then I'm going to light backwards for that. I'm going to light for the slow mo backwards, and then we kind of build from there. But then
Yeah.
it's like punch by punch, we work ourselves backwards out of this. Know what the room is. Do we need a light 360? Do we
Yeah.
need to hide elements on screen? If it,
Mm.
I recently did this thing, which was like a small little scuffle in a bathroom. I have to now build that type of light and that type of exposure and ambience
Hmm.
into the fixtures that we see on screen. So now we brought in a couple, like it was roughly a handful of fake fixtures built in tubes that we could control. They fortunately, our department had enough time to like not make them look like tubes, which is great in this day and age. And then you end up building a lot more practical in it, so that you have not just the camera has the floor, but let the people who are swinging have the floor. Because if everybody gets a little bit for themselves, the whole thing works super well.
Yeah.
I give you a little bit, they give you a little bit, and the whole thing flows. Like you can just stay liquid, stay seamless.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh yeah. No, it was interesting. I mean, even with the film I worked on, where one of the guys, he had a lot of stunt training, and he was under the mask, and he was kind of the stunt coordinator for our film, and it was great to watch him work with the actors. And the wonderful thing about having a mask on was that he could count out like blocking, so he could be like
Yeah,
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and it
yeah,
was just the beats that they had worked out together, them and the actor, and so it was really cool and I think my biggest takeaway that I learned was like everything that you're talking about is like, yeah, really let them take the floor and listen to them more and let them have
listen,
more time to work it out, because then they might even get in like a cooler, thing versus whatever,
100%.
you
Like you
know.
might have an idea, and it's good to come in with an idea, right? But let them take the wheel. They're
Yeah.
going to show you something, and they've learned, what not to do. Just like I've learned what not to do, fortunately.
Yeah.
They're going to get you ahead of that conversation and
Yeah.
just kind of let them work on it. Now, if this is a bigger project, obviously this is like a completely different conversation. There's probably pre-visualization, and you're
Yeah.
working with a VFX team most likely. And now you're just actually matching a storyboard to a storyboard element. And that's not even what we're talking about. But if we're talking about like indie filmmaking, let the coordinator take the wheel, watch out for safety, watch out for the things you need, try to protect the things that you like, try to protect the things that they like, try to protect the things that the director likes,
Yeah.
combine that, and it's probably going to work pretty nicely, I think,
Yeah.
as long as you made enough time for
Right.
it.
Which goes back to
time,
like
time is
the
the thing.
triangle. Yeah.
The
It,
triangle.
it's so funny because now that I've like been through the gauntlet, now it's like people are like, what would you want more of, money or time? I'm like, oh, time.
Time. Every time.
Like if I could get 2 more
Forget,
days or whatever. Yeah.
give me the time every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
So I guess just a couple more questions. You know,
Yeah, of
um
course.
I don't know. Just going to, I think one thing that I love a lot, and I saw this even recently, was like so many people get their start in horror movies, and I
Yeah.
go back to like, I mean, I could list like, all right, so like George Clooney, Kevin Bacon, Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, Billy Zane
Paul Rudd.
was in Critters, Paul Rudd. It was in what was he in the Halloween 5 or 6 or
Five,
something?
was it?
I think one of
Yeah,
those
five or
ones.
six.
One
Yeah.
of the ones I don't like, but yeah.
Yeah.
And even to go to like some of the movies we worked on, I thought was fascinating how, like Christina Klebe, who was in Brooklyn 45, was in Rob
Mm.
Zombie's Halloween. And I remember
Yeah.
talking to her about, she took over the role that I'm gonna blank now, but what's her face from Carrie? Oh well, she had the hat. Anyway, whatever.
Uh, Podcasts are for blanking.
That's
That's
okay.
just what it is.
Yeah.
I couldn't even list some of the
Yeah.
scariest movies anymore. I just go
Right.
blank.
Or even Ezra Buzzington was in like the
Yeah.
Alejandro Aja's remake of The Hills Have Eyes. And so I don't know,
Yeah.
what do you think it is about horror that is just such a great, to me it's an amazing gateway for filmmakers to get into, to go on to from there. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing start for a creative, first and foremost. Like I said, I kind of touched on it earlier. You're kind of playing with all the departments in the sandbox, like
Yeah.
you might in your career go on to work on a comedy or drama or sci-fi. Well, sci-fi touches on a chunk of this stuff, but you end up working on other genre pieces that really don't use all the departments. They don't use all the things in the sandbox, but genre and horror in general uses everybody. Like everybody plays on the field. No one's on the bench.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the field, and I think that after you and I have done, I don't even know how many films together now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only are you not only are you on the field, but you're like sometimes all of a sudden like you're taking the wheel too. Sometimes we all need
Right.
everybody in the car, and especially in indie horror has a foot on the wheel at some point
Right.
because they wish they had a hand on the wheel, but like
Yeah.
everybody's in play, you know, because we're all trying to make an amazing thing like magical and come together and pull it
Yeah.
off. It's pretty fun. Like as
Yeah.
a creative, it's like one of the best things in the world, you
Yeah.
know?
I think it's amazing because I just go back to kind of like what we started talking about with this is like kind of as a kid you grow up and you build your like film literacy and you develop your language, and I think like horror has a definite like visual style and visual language, and it goes all over the place, but there's definitely the unsettling elements of it, and to go to like production design and all these other
Mhm.
pieces, it's really great. I don't know if I really have a point there, but just like I just love, to me it opened my eyes to how much bigger and of a genre it is, and I think it gets credit for, because when I grew up in the 80s, it was always like, oh, these are the, you know, evil films, and parents were always like protesting, like
Yeah,
Silent Night, Deadly Night, and all this kind of stuff. But I remember specifically there's like Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert were just totally panning all these movies, and just I think they even invited people to like write terrible letters to like the creators of some of the films.
yeah. It's
But
just too easy sometimes, you
yeah.
know. Manson went through it, and you know,
Oh
Marilyn
yeah.
Manson, that is.
Oh yeah. Or even like
Uh,
and go to, but I always love there's a movie called Intruder, which was a slasher film, but it was
mm,
written and produced by Lawrence Bender, who then went on to produce Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and Good Will Hunting. It's
yeah,
just kind of cool to see, just how I feel like horror is a very universal thing, and it goes across all different, like for international distribution, like horror does it pretty well along with action and sci-fi versus like comedy or something like that because of the cultural barriers. But anyway,
right.
I guess my last thing is kind of like, other than horror, what are some of the biggest things you would, I don't know, what are some things you would tell someone who's interested in becoming a cinematographer and will likely start making horror films? So.
I mean, what some of the biggest things are just like if you're at the front end of it, you know, a good reminder to somebody is just watching your favorite films on mute, you know.
Mm.
Oftentimes that, you know, is something I even go back to, you know, because you know, as you're unpacking the magic of something, um, especially in horror, you're enveloped in amazing production design. And this is what you were just talking about. You're literally hitting on amazing sound design. You're hitting on amazing wardrobe, and you don't even know it until you mute things.
Yeah.
I mean, horror, in my opinion, slash movies in general are like, you know, what do they say, 70% sound?
Yeah.
You know,
Oh
my
yeah.
job's only 30%. You know, so I'm just like that crummy cinematographer. I'm only covering 30% of what's going on. But you know, when you actually mute, um, that really gives you a chance to really just like marinate in what the design work is. You get to really see like, oh dang, like they actually, the wardrobe department did an amazing
Mhm.
thing right here. And you might go, Rob, what are you talking about right now? But like, let me give you an example because I know that's probably what you're asking for. You know, when you have that same like knife to the chest that I was talking about earlier, and I'm just this is the most generic knife to the chest example, but like you're gonna start thinking like, as I'm making this movie, I don't want my character in a navy blue hoodie.
Mm.
I want them to be in like, is it like, you know, she has like a button down white striped shirt? Is it need to be more white than striped? Does she have light colored jeans on? So
Right.
that when she gets to the end of the film, we can see her journey of dirt, of crawling around on floors and
Yeah.
you know, crawling away from this person across a field or a dirty attic, or you know, this wardrobe person has to have that same design and forethought to have thought, all right, they're going to start the movie where it's happier and bright, their clothes are starched
Mm.
and or bleached and set up, da, 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 da. And so that like by the end of the movie we have now a wardrobe journey, but also it works for the effects team so that if I had them in black jeans and a navy blue you know, tank top or a navy blue hoodie, you would actually see the freaking knife and the freaking blood. Because
Right.
like
Yeah.
if you don't do that, now you've really dug a hole that you will not be able to get out of.
Right. Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
man, what was your original question?
I don't know. Just like,
No,
well, no,
I
that's
think
it.
you're talking about the departments. I think in general, like working together.
Oh
You
yeah.
know.
I think like, well, to me, because I feel like if and so many of the cinematographers that I've talked to, like, who got their start in horror films, so I feel like a lot of people who are going to go into indie film are
Yeah.
probably going to be going into making a horror film first before they ever get into like a drama or a comedy or something. So I think, it's just interesting. It's like all the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of like pacing and kind of understanding. Because I think one time
Yeah.
I just remember one time, and I think having that visual language and the film literacy is good because sometimes I'll kind of fall back on like, oh, like if they say the film or whatever, I'm like, I got it. Like I got what you're trying to talk about,
Yeah.
and so I think that helps as like a shorthand versus, okay, he's gonna come in and he do the fingers and all that. And I don't know.
I think horror, the genre of horror, like you're hitting on right here, is kind of like it is that groundwork to every other type of filmmaking,
Yeah, yeah,
drama, comedy. I mean, honestly, even action. I mean, it really shares a little bit of all these
yeah,
things. You
yeah,
have to know a little bit of action. You have to know a little bit of where the score is going to hit.
yeah.
As I'm pushing in on a character's close up, or if they're looking right down the barrel, as I know they're experiencing something in the edit, I know I got to slow this move down because I
Oh yeah.
know the person who's writing score is going to like either scream my name, like I'm going to, like, I can't stand you right now, or they're going to be like, I love what he did right here because he gave me like 3 more seconds to get like
Right.
3 extra piano keys out. And those extra 3 piano keys is what's going to change everything. Like you just have to like
Yeah.
think just a little bit on behalf of every other department.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty special.
I think the last thing I say is just, and to go to like we were talking about Spielberg earlier, but it's
Oh
funny
yeah.
because I do feel like he is a horror filmmaker cloaked in the skies of action adventure family. Because every film that I can think of, like especially the
Hmm.
films that made the biggest impression on me, have these amazing scenes that are so terrifying. I even go to
Oh, for
like
sure.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind when the aliens come
Raiders
to
of the
the
Lost Ark.
house. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
Lost
Raiders of the
Ark.
Lost Ark at the end, or even
Oh man.
or Close Encounters to me, it's like
Shakti Day.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can imagine that scene when like the aliens are coming to the house and they're going to get the kid and he's like, toys or whatever. But then there's like that scene where like the screws are coming loose
Yeah.
off of the
Oh
thing
yeah,
and
dude.
then that light's
Yep.
coming down the shaft and I'm just like, oh, I'm getting
100%.
I'm getting like chills right now just thinking about it because it's like I
Yep.
I'll think about like I'll be like, hey, we should watch Close Encounters with like, my kids and I'll think about that scene. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna wait.
So did you just unlock something
Nightmares.
there? I wonder if you just unlocked something. Like if we took these moments from all Spielberg's films and
Yeah.
just chopped them together, would it be like the ultimate horror
Oh
movie
yeah. I
ever?
mean, I mean
Like you should
Jurassic
just do some
Park.
like Voltron of Spielberg
Right. I'll
scary
tell you.
moments. It
I
might be
mean,
like the best horror flick ever.
oh yeah, yeah. Because I'm sure, like Jurassic Park. I mean, that's basically a horror film.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
So,
Like, but even the films he's produced, like you
oh
start
yeah.
looking at like what he did with Poltergeist and like
Oh
some of
yeah.
these things, and you go,
Yeah.
"Oh my goodness!" Like,
Yeah.
did he not really want to direct Poltergeist because he's still got to play it safe, you know?
Right.
So then he's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you guys go have fun over here.
Right.
I
Well,
wish I could be doing that."
I know he was like right down the road making ET at the same time, which I think
Yeah,
I still remember seeing ET in the theater and my sister when Elliot meets ET in the cornfield because
ah,
that's like a horror scene right there too. And then he
yeah,
comes out and I just remember the popcorn went flying in the air and my dad had to take her out in the hallway for like 15 minutes. So he missed all of the sweet cuddly ET stuff when he like is giving him Reese's Pieces. But anyway,
seriously.
that's all I got. But anyway, I just want to say thank you so much again for taking time out to talk.
Oh
This has been
man,
really fun. I think, to me, it's like I didn't realize how challenging it would be to make a horror film, and it's all these things you're talking about. And I think
hmm,
very ambitious for anybody to go out and make a horror film because there's all these considerations. And so it's just really
yeah.
cool to hear all of your stuff. And any final words of advice or other than run away screaming?
Yeah,
Just
whatever
kidding.
you do right now, just take your headphones off and run away screaming. No, I mean this. Thank you so much for having me on. I would love
Yeah.
to do it again. And if there's something more specific, feel free to reach out to me, or if you want to hit me up on IG or something like that, that's totally fine. It might take me 3 days or 3 weeks to get back to you, but as John knows, I will get back to you eventually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, like one note to film lovers or filmmakers, film workers out there is like do whatever you can to take risk because that's to me like it's going to be very uncomfortable. But if you have that uncomfortable feeling, I think that's where you want to be. You
Yeah.
know, if you feel comfortable, that's when I really start getting nervous because I feel like the progress isn't there. So like, I guess I'm speaking to myself too, by the way, everybody. But like, if you're taking risk and you feel uncomfortable, that's probably where you need to be. It's probably
Yeah.
where you need to be. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's what I would put out there. Because if it's not risky, it's not worth making, really, in my opinion.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, man. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah,
Thanks
of
again for
course.
coming on.
Thanks, Sean.
Sure. I'll see
Thanks
you
for
later.
having me.
Sure. See you,
Yeah.
man. See you.
Bye bye.
All right, cool. See you.